Hello and welcome to this review of my DAS5Q keyboard. This was a donation. It was a Kickstarter keyboard whose owner lost faith in it before it even came out, so they had it sent to me instead. Now, from what I've read, the Kickstarter campaign of this keyboard was a very bumpy ride indeed, with long delays and some pretty shady practices going on, so I can see how all this would lead someone to not wanting it anymore. In any case, thanks again, mate. Last week I did a DAS2, the Mark III Model S, but this one promises to be quite a bit more, and at $109 for a super early bird backer, or $249 retail, only recently discounted to $219, it had better be, let's be honest. Now, apart from API open sourceness and cloudiness, its main selling point is that it can be configured to function more like a dashboard than just a keyboard, using the RGB to clue the user into certain things. Let me elaborate. It appears to be aimed at people who have basically mind-melded their brain with the computer, as per this amusing paragraph on the Kickstarter page, which reads, "Do you often find yourself with millions of browser tabs open, constantly switching context to keep up with project status, weather info, software build statuses, customer quality metrics, stock quotes, website alarms, and even your boss's urgent emails? Tracking so much information involves a lot of mental context switching. That's your productivity going down the drain. You've known this all along but can't help it because you just have to be in the know. You're an overachiever and there is absolutely no way even a single piece of information will escape you. Your peers frequently pick your brain because you are the keeper of knowledge. Put simply, you are the one who knows. Period. I drink and I know things." So, to translate this slightly sinister-sounding marketing piffle, it means that you can link the backlighting on the keyboard to output specific signals when certain conditions are met. Some examples they provide are the browser tab that shows your company's software build status. Set it on the B key. Green means the build passes, red means it's a fail. Is your company customer satisfaction important to you? Set the keys on the number row to display customer satisfaction from 1 to 10 as a bar graph. And there's loads more examples in the, by the way, fairly convenient tutorial. Now, this sounded quite intriguing until it dawned on me that what this actually means is that you move the notification messages or light that you normally get on your computer to the keyboard. So, let me iterate that. Instead of getting certain messages on your monitor, which you're looking at anyway, you'd get them on your keyboard, which you're probably not looking at. And when I thought about it like that, it suddenly actually sounded rather pointless. Now, I'll be honest, I might not be the perfect person to review this, because this sounds like it's way above my level of computer integration, and certainly above my measly pay grade on YouTube, that's for sure. But I tried to fuck around with it a bit regardless, to see if I could get it to work, and to see whether I could gain any benefit from it. More on that later. First impressions of the keyboard, it looks a bit different from most DASs. It still has a volume wheel, which you can actually press to interact with the messages the keyboard gives out, but not the ugly tumor at the top right. It's still not a very good looking keyboard in my opinion, but it's not quite a DAS 3 or 4 level. The ABS keycaps, however, use a font that's arguably even uglier than the Model S's, with some kind of cyber-like style with squared off edges, a bit like razors. It's hideous! And to make it worse, the font is stenciled, which isn't even necessary because the lettering is laser ablated. Perhaps they're pretending to be double shots or something. It fingerprints very badly as well, which is a common occurrence with laser ablated backlit keycaps. The surface uses a very fine, almost non-existent granulation as a texture on which fingerprints stand out horribly, basically makes the board look gross after just a few hours of use. Also, my first response at this thing was, what is that Windows key for fuck's sake? But it turned out to be DAS's logo. Okay, it's a peculiar choice for a keyboard perhaps, but whatever. If you're not comfortable with the keycaps, you're buggered by the way, because the switches use a mount that's nothing like MX, so you can't really stick on your favorite jellos or whatever. The volume wheel is quite nice to use, moving very smoothly, and it's ratcheted as well, unlike most volume wheels I've seen so far, which I actually like. However, it only changes volume by 2% for every unit of turn, which is way too little for my taste. You need to work the hell out of it to get a significant increase or decrease. For example, from mute to full takes this amount of turn. And now it's on full, so that's way too slow. Also, it works the other way around. If you move it up, the volume goes down, and vice versa. Furthermore, I don't think it's made very well because it moves a lot. I mean, look at this. I can just tilt it in all directions very easily. It's got dedicated media keys, not just shortcuts pasted over other keys over here. Now, I don't really use them very often, but to be honest, the one thing I did notice is that there is no backwards key, which seems a shame. At least they do an ISO version for us perverted Europeans, and all modern boards can boast of that. It took a while though, from what I gathered. Now, before I get into the backlight-mediated cloud integration dashboard stuff, I want to get into the switches, which are a superficially identical-looking rebrand of Roma G switches. Both are produced by Omron, but the Gamma Zulu has deeper key travel, 3.5 instead of 3 mm, and a longer lifetime of 100 million instead of 70 million cycles. Apart from that, they appear to be the same switch. It's a rather light switch, 55 grams of force at the tactile bump, but when I say tactile bump, I actually mean a slight roughening in the key travel. If they said it was a linear switch, I wouldn't have questioned it. It's very comparable to Cherry MX Brown, so if tactile switches without tactility are your thing, you'll probably like these too. Integral to the switch, and indeed this is what it was designed around, more or less literally, is this central light pipe. It's intended to distribute light more evenly across the underside of the caps and to improve light bundling. Let me elaborate on those last 2 points a little bit. The first is light distribution. Now in Cherry MX switches with integrated LEDs, like this, you can see that the LED is all the way at the upper side of the switch, which means that only the top of the keycaps gets backlit, so secondary legends don't show up as well. By putting the light pipe in the middle, the Gamma Zulu switches are intended to cause better light distribution, and indeed, as you can see on this 4 key, which has legends quite far out of the middle, all 3 legends are evenly and equally lit, so that aspect definitely works. There's some, but relatively very little, light bleed from under the keycaps too, so the lighting really feels like it comes from the legends specifically, rather than from the keyboard in general. An easy way to compare that is to show it next to a Corsair K70, which has an enormous amount of light bleed, so much so that you can actually see my hand light up. And it's so bad that even if I move my hand above the other keyboard, still the only thing you can see is red. The second point is the light bundling. Now on some switches, again often RGB fitted MX type switches, the light's 3 component colors, red, green and blue, aren't bundled very well, which means that instead of appearing as a homogeneous new color, you simply see a separation of component colors instead. Here's some examples of keyboards I reviewed previously where you can see it. The best way I've found to test for this is to set the color to all yellow, as its component colors red and green are the easiest to spot, and then look at the reflection of the light on the keycaps above. This Corsair, for example, has extremely terrible light bundling. Presumably it's the textured tops of the light pipes, which reflect in all directions, that are supposed to aid in light bundling with these Gamma Zulu switches, which would also partly explain why there's often no light pipe in monochrome Roma G keyboard models. Now, the yellow on this board, I think I'll let you judge it for yourself. The white ballot on the camera makes it slightly less obvious than it really is, but to me it's not super great, and it becomes more obvious when you take one of the keycaps off, in which case the component red and especially green colors become very obvious. It's certainly not the worst I've seen so far, but for a switch that's literally designed around RGB compatibility, I find this rather disappointing. Similarly, white, as in RGB 255, 255, 255, looks distinctly purplish if you ask me, although it's very difficult to see on the camera. White is another color most RGB boards can't get right. Now, when you're just statically looking at the caps, you may or may not find the bundling to your liking, but when you move your eyes and kind of gloss over the keycaps, another weakness becomes apparent. Basically, when zooming over the keycaps, it looks like the colors somehow pulse in such a way that the colors completely unmix. It's difficult to explain in words perhaps. All I can say is that when I move my eyes quickly across the board, it doesn't look white like this at all, but it looks like squares of red, green and blue, almost like you're looking at a close-up of a grid of pixels. It's very distracting and quite annoying actually, to the point of being nauseating. Actually, it just occurred to me that I might be able to show it using my mobile phone if I move it very quickly around, and when I tested it a second ago, this seemed to work very well, so I'm going to demonstrate it using that. If you're epileptic, you might want to look away because this might very well trigger you. Right, ready? Here you go. Yeah, so if I do it like this, you can very easily see the flecks of red, green and blue separate, which is kind of what it looks like in person. It's quite nauseating, as you can probably imagine about now. I've seen it on another keyboard as well, this Ajaz AK33 keyboard that I reviewed a while ago. Now, this uses different switches, a type of Cherry MX Blue clone, so I don't think it's the Gamma Zulu switches that cause it. I think it has something to do with the frequency of the lighting or something. Now, I set this one to yellow, and as you can see, it separates into the base red and green colors very easily. The lighting on 8 or so of the switches failed after just a few days actually, but ever since a firmware update that they rolled out recently, they've been working again. Bit weird. This key here still doesn't work though. So moving on to the software, surprisingly, it's relatively decent, or at least I've seen much worse. It's very stable, and with the opening tutorial I was able to configure everything I wanted. I've been told that it was originally super terrible, but that it was fixed in several successive updates before I started using it. Now, the idea behind the dashboarding is that you take these applets from the keyboard store or something, and you install them onto the keyboard, then drag them onto the keys you want them on, and that's it, which, like I said, is pretty easy. However, I still see some shortcomings here. First of all, although there's a few dozen applets in the store, I'm sure that this won't cover all the needs of these superhumans that the keyboard is supposedly meant for. And I guess that means you'll have to program them yourself, but in that case, why not just write a program that alerts you on your computer rather than on the keyboard? I guess the concept is very convenient for DAS because although they've made a bunch of starting applets, if this takes off, the bulk of the work doesn't have to be done by them, and neither are they responsible for the quality of other users as applets. The way the applets work is also just not what you would expect. For example, the one that displays CPU usage is different from the one that displays GPU usage. The CPU is a bar displayed across the number keys in my case, while the GPU one is a single key, it blinks, and the colors appear to run in the other direction because it's red when I'm not doing anything. And at this point you might be thinking, I'll just configure it to do something different, but the applets don't appear to be configurable really, which is a shame. There's a 4-day weather forecast applet too, which I programmed on these 4 F keys. And even though there is a legend included to show what the colors mean, I'm still not completely sure how it works. For example, the first one is pink, which means cloudy, but does that mean it's cloudy today, or does it mean it's going to be cloudy tomorrow? And that kind of goes to show that there is really only so much that you can show with just colors as a medium. You know, how much information can you convey with just a bunch of RGB on your keyboard? Another weakness of the software is that once you've dragged the applet onto one or more of the keys, you can't move them anymore. You need to uninstall the thing first and then reinstall it again where you want it. Furthermore, an inherent weakness of the dashboardism is that realistically you'll need to switch off at least part of the backlighting to get a clear view of the lighting effects, because if you have a CPU bar and a weather forecast and whatever running through a full RGB board, it'll get very confusing. And this escalates the problem that the legends aren't that easy to read when the backlighting is off, which is something that most non-reflective RGB caps suffer from. Overall, the board has a fun little gimmick, but I'm not sure it's useful even from a fundamental perspective. Besides, the caps are bad and the flickering RGB is really doing my head in. I mean, the build quality is okay and it's got a pretty nice, comfortable magnetic wrist rest, but at $219, I mean, what are you really getting for that money? And that's at a discount price, mind you. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.